going to get us going with the sponsors, and then we'll get to today's Gemara. The Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Konigsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Konigsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Leibush, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nissen Hara Nissen ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend, Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov. Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. The many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush. Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi. Friends of Toby Paris. Saratova bat Yisrael Dov. Friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon. Cheryl Scher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva. Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel ben Harav Shimon. Friends of Joseph Wolf, in memory of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Yisrael. A Month of Learning, sponsored by Adina and Michael Kirshner, in memory of their parents, Florence and Nathan Kirshner, and friend Harriet Friedman. Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her mother, Henya Bas Rav Beryl, and her father, Aharon ben Yosef Mordechai. Harry and Jill Meltzer, in memory of his mother, Malka Bas Baruch, and his sister, Goldalea Bas David Halevi. Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her father, Yehoshua Shia ben Moshe Yehuda HaKohen. Stanley Presser, in memory of his mother, Leah Bas Yehuda, his mother-in-law, Golda Bas Avram, and his wife, Ruchel Mincha Bas Moshe. Ruth Burian, Judy and Edward Moyne, in memory of Ruth and Judy's mother, Hadassah bat Azriel Zelig V'Miriam, and father, Yitzchak ben Yosef for Esther. And we have a week of learning concluding today. Doesn't conclude today. A week of learning by Ann and David Klar, in memory of her mother, Gidel Bas Yaakov. Also a week of learning, Sam and Ramona Levine and Charlie Gelfenstein, in memory of Sam's mother and Charlie's mother-in-law, Livsha Bas Avram Shammai, and Sam's father and Charlie's father-in-law, Yechiel Michel ben Harav Alexander Ziskin. May the Neshamas have an Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Vel Yashir Hashem Atliya, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael a good Gaban Shtiyar.
Hey.
Okay. Make a little hot cocoa in the morning to warm up and get the throat going.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, I am just do a very quick review. We're seeing what is involved in terms of the actual roasting of the Pesach, Korban Pesach. Okay, Gemara, the Mishnah told us certain elements. Okay, particularly it said Naga Bechar So. I'm sorry, we'll get to that's the new Mishnah. Okay, so we're on Ayin Hay, right? And on Ayin Hay, we're going to start with the top of the second line of the Amud. And this Mishnah, continuation of the Mishnah, was talking about the grill, right? Ein Solina to Pesach, cites the Gemara. And in the Mishnah, you'll remember that it specifically said that one used a stick, okay, a piece of wood as a spit from a pomegranate tree. Okay. Then it went on to tell us clearly, Ein solin et Pesach lo al hashipud, not on a metal spit, velo al haaskala, and not on a metal grill. And then we saw the story from Rabbi Tzadok, Maaseh Rabban Gamliel she'amar l'tabi avdo, telling his servant Tabi, say utzle lanu et Pesach al haaskala, go out and roast the Korban Pesach on this grill. Okay, so coming back now to our Amud for today, Ayin Aleph, second line. Gemara asks initially the question, Maaseh listor, does this story come to contradict? Is what it's asking. In other words, to disagree with the statement that the Mishnah said that you can't do it on a grill. So Gemara now continues. Something is missing in our statement, and this is how we have to teach it. Ve'im ha'eskola menukevet, if the grill is, I'm going to call it open, okay? It has holes in it. In other words, there's a place, it's open enough, and again, the Koran has a picture of a grill, okay, of that kind. Namely, it was basically a metal frame that simply had rows, okay, but it was on top of a fire pit, okay? And so that was the picture that the Koran had, Koran explanation of the Gemara. Mutar, that would be permitted, says the text. Va'amar Rabbi Tzadok, and Rabbi Tzadok said, Maaseh Rabban Gamliel, that the incident with Rabban Gamliel, she'amar l'tabi avdo, who spoke to his servant Tabi, say utzle lanu et Pesach al ha'askala menukevet.
That was missing.
Okay, go and roast this Pesach on the, we'll call it for a moment, open grill, okay? Or grill with holes in it.
Holy Grill.
Okay. Sounds like the name of a good restaurant.
Right.
Okay. Ba'e mine Rav Chinana bar Idi me Rav Ada bar Ahava. So we now have a question raised, right? Now we're going to be going into quite a number of examples of cooking issues. And I would simply point out that just as yesterday, we saw that the principle of kach polto was introduced, and that becomes a general kashrut principle.
Right.
So now in the next Amud, Daf, so on, we're going to see some other aspects that really become foundation, I'll say, principles, ideas regarding kashrut in general. Okay. All right. So now, tanur shehesiko b'klipe orla. Let's assume, he says, that we have an oven that has been heated by pieces of, say, wood, okay? And that wood actually came from a tree that was subject to orla. In other words, it was less than the necessary age, right? 3 years, the garfo, and they swept out those pieces of wood, charcoal, okay, things like that. Va'afa bo et hapat, and one bakes bread in it. L'divrei ha'oser, according to the view of the one who prohibits this, mahu, what's the status of the bread? Marle hapat muteret, the bread would be permitted. Amarle, so he responds back, Va'amar Rav Chinana Saba. But didn't the Rav Chinana the elder, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Say in the name of Rabbi Asi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Tanur shehisiku v'garfo, an oven that had been heated, okay, and then cleaned it out.
Right.
V'tzalabo et haPesach, and they roasted the korban Pesach in it. Ein zetzli eish, that is not considered to be roasting by fire. Okay, Shnamar, why? Because the pasuk says tzli eish shtei pa'amim, that actually the phrase tzli eish, roasted by fire, is found twice. Ta'ama, the Gale Rachmana, the reason being that Kadosh Baruch Hu has revealed, in other words, required, informed us, and therefore making it a requirement. Tzli eish, shtei pa'amim. The fact that it says tzli eish 2 times, okay, implies that it must be expressly, certainly roasted by direct fire, with nothing in between. Ha lo gale rachmana, had the Torah text not informed us of this, have amina, I would have believed, tzli eish he, okay, that would have been simply roasting it by fire, and you could have theoretically the grill where the fire could get through the holes or the empty spaces. Amarle, he responds, Gali Rachmana Hatam, okay, Vialfinan Mine, okay, the Torah informed us, revealed this information there, and we learn from it the following. Ve'ibayat Ema, and if you want, I would say, Hatam, okay, there in that case, when we're talking about the oven initially, Tama de Katav Rachmana Tzli Eish Shtei Pa'amim. That when we're talking about that oven, okay, in which you roasted the Korban Pesach, it was precisely because it was written twice. In this case, in other words, our other example, okay, lo katav rachmana tzli eish shtei pa'amim. Okay, since it was not written and informed, revealed to us 2 times, hava amina, I could have believed the following: aish kapid rachmana, that it was in regards to fire that the Torah was strict or requirement, va'afilu garfu, and even if one cleaned it out, nami tzli eshu, there is still considered to be tzli esh, fire, okay, roasting by fire. Aval hacha, okay, but here, in the case that you presented, ha'etzim, where we were talking about, let's say, wood chips, or we were talking about another kind of fuel, the isura, okay, which might have been forbidden, kakapid rachmana, that in this case the Torah is being strict, vaha litnaho, and therefore we are not able to use them. Okay, so the implication being clearly here that that bread would then be considered forbidden, okay, because of the fact that the source of the fuel was an inappropriate source, okay, orla. Okay. Now, Tanu Rabbanan, okay, let's get to a new Braita, says the Gemara. We're dealing still now with a variety of, again, issues. Chatcho, if he cut it, v'natno al gabe gechalim, and he puts the item, let's assume for the moment it's the Korban Pesach, on top of coals, Rabbi Omer, according to Rabbi, Omer ani shazetz li esh, that Rabbi claims that this is a valid form of roasting by fire. However, the Gemara continues, Rami le Rav Achdabai bar Ami, this a contradiction in regards to what Rebbe had said was raised by Rav Achdubai bar Amai to Rav Chisda. Mi amar Rebbe gechalim eish ninhu? Is it possible that Rebbe really said that putting something on coals is like fire? Or minhu? But will raise a contradiction based on the following. When we talk about a situation where a person has leprosy, okay, and they have the spot from the disease, leprosy, whatever that we want to call it, and it's on a part of their flesh which had previously, let's say, been burnt. Okay? What is the situation there? That's a rather unique and different occurrence. And this is what he brings. Michvat esh, if it's something burnt, right? Ein li ella shenichva ba'esh. There we're only talking about a situation of the person with that scar from the burn, and leprosy is on it, whereas actually burnt by fire. Nichva begachelet, if it was burnt by contact with a coal. Beramatz, contact with burning ash. Basid roteach, contact with burning lime. Bigvasim roteach, or contact with burning plaster. The kol davar haba min haor, or anything else that came from fire, light, le'etuye chame haor. That even includes hot water. Minayin, how do we know this? Talmud Lomar, in other words, those don't apply as, so to speak, real burns in the case of leprosy. Talmud Lomar, why? Because the text of the Torah teaches michva refers twice to the idea of a burn, riba, and therefore it includes these things. All right? So now it's saying that in this case, okay, it's not just a direct fire burn, but burn from other situations are also included in the special status of somebody with leprosy on that scar, that disfigurement. Tama, okay, why? The Rebbe Rachmana, because the Torah includes it twice. Michvah. Okay. Therefore, ha lo Rebbe Rachmana, michvah. Okay. So here, okay, that doesn't seem to be the explanation of Rebbe. Okay. Where the Torah says michvah, kichalim lav esh ninhu, which would seem to imply, if we're not going to, only because of the double lashon is it included. But ordinarily, it would seem to imply that coals, lav eish ninhu, would not be considered actually fire, which therefore seems to be the opposite, to contradict what Rebbe had said.
Right.
Okay. Now, Amarle, so he said to him, Gachelet shel eitz lo itzterich kral rabui. A coal that's been produced as a result of wood, it does not need that verse to be included as a kind of fire source. Why? Ki itzterich kra Why? When is the verse needed? Legachelet shel matechet. If the coal, in other words, if the source of the heat came from metal. V'gachalim shel matechet lav eshu. So we ask, therefore, are you saying that let's say the source of fire, the coals made from metal, are not considered real fire? V'hagabe bat kohen dichtiv. But what about the situation we have in the case of a daughter of a Kohen, okay, who's going to be punished, right, by, okay, or inappropriate sexual activity through the punishment of Sreifa. Okay? Right? It says there, Be'esh Tisarei, by fire, she will be burnt. Va'amar, and we say there, according to Rav Matna, Ptila shel Ever hayu osin, that they would actually make a, let's say, a lead,
some kind of torch.
Well, it was like a molten lead, okay? Some molten lead, that's what they would prepare for her. Okay, in other words, they would pour that down her throat as the punishment. Okay, so that would seem to imply by that example that that metal, okay, could be considered a kind of fire.
Sreifa, right.
Kind of sreifa. So the Gemara now explains to us, Shani Hatam. That case is different. Okay. The Amar Kra. Why? Because the Pasuk says, Ba'esh tisaref. By fire, she will be burnt. Tisaref, that she will be burnt, the Rabot Kol Sreifot Habaot Min Ha'esh. That includes any kind of fire, items that are burning as a result of fire. The kol shekain, and certainly eish atzma, fire itself. V'nakifla, and what do we say here? That they maybe then, says the Gemara, let's surround her, chaviles morot, v'nikla, surround her with branches, tree branches, and light them up, the branches. So the Gemara answers, Atya sreifa mibnei Aharon. But this comes as a gzera shava, okay, based on the word sreifa there, and sreifa associated with the sons of Aaron. Malahalan sreifat neshama v'guf kayam. Remember that they were struck by, I don't know if I'll call it lightning, but from the Aron, right? And okay, when they offered Eish Zara, right, and it went out to them and it struck their bodies. They died. They were burnt inside, but their bodies were intact. From that example. So that's what it's saying here, right? Mala halan sreifat neshama v'guf kayam, that their soul was burnt, but their body remained. Afkan, so likewise with regards to the daughter of the Kohen, inappropriate sexual behavior, right? Sreifat neshama v'guf kayam. So also her soul is burnt, but her body exists. So the Gemara raises another challenge. V'na'avid la chamei ha'or. So let's go ahead and use boiling hot water. Right? In other words, pour that down her throat. Mishum Rabban de Rabbi Nachman. But we say, We don't do that because of the view of Rabbi Nachman. The Amar Rav Nachman, who Rav Nachman says, Amar Kra, there is a pasuk, Va'ahavta l're'echa kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Barur lo mita yafa. Namely, choose for the person let's call it more than just an appropriate death, a dignified, so to speak, death. The kima achar the Ika Rav Nachman, and since we have this view of Rav Nachman, Gzeira Shava Lamali. If that's the case, why do we need the Gzeira Shava of Sreifa between the daughter of the Kohen and the other cases of the Kohen? Why is that necessary? Amre, we can say as follows. Ilav Gzeira Shava, if we didn't have the Gzeira Shava, Hava Amina, I would have said, Sreifat Neshama, V'guf Kayam, Lav Sreifahi. Okay, that burning of her soul, but allowing the body to remain would not be considered actual burning. Ve'imi shum de Rav Nachman, and if we're saying this based on the view of Rav Nachman, nifush la chavi leis morot tova. Okay, so let us go and gather and use the branches again. Only more branches. Okay, ki hechi detamut ba'agala. Okay, why? Because the question is, therefore she would die more quickly. Kamash malan comes to teach us that's not the case. The ela be'esh lamali. So why then do we say that it has to be done by fire? La'afuke aver me'ikaro. That comes to exclude the idea of lead initially in its original form. In other words, by melting the lead, you've actually put fire to the lead, and therefore that's how they can explain that she dies by some fire. Okay. Otherwise, the lead itself, okay, could have other ingredients in it, all right, which would not be, so to speak, pure molten lead to be used. Amar le, okay, and he said to him, Rabbi Yirmiyah the Rabbi Zera, a new issue. The kol hecha gedichtiv be'esh tesaref, wherever it's written then, by fire she shall be burnt. The Rabbot kol sreifot habaot mechamat eshu. Does that therefore include any kinds of burning, any kinds of fire of that there might be? Vaha gabe parim hanisrafim. What about the example of those animals that are offerings that are burnt? Dichtiv baho, because by them it's also written, v'sarafoto al eitzim ba'esh, that they are burnt on wood. Okay, and the wood is on fire, which doesn't necessarily mean that the bodies of the animals are actually on fire. Vitanya, and we teach also in a Braita, be'esh v'lo b'sidroteach, by fire and not by burning lime, v'lo b'gafsis roteach, and not by burning plaster. Amarle, he said to him, hachi hashta, is that any kind of a comparison? Hatam kativ ba'esh, there it's written clearly with fire. V'hadar tesaref l'rabot kol sreifot habaot mechamat esh. And therefore it comes to include any other kind of fire, okay, that is produced any kind of burning that is produced through fire. Hacha. Okay, however, here, okay, in the case of the bowls, kativ, it's written specifically, v'saraf oto al eitzim ba'esh, okay, that they're burnt on wood with fire. The vasof, esh, the memra, ultimately, it comes to tell us, ultimately through fire, by the means of fire. Therefore, de esh en, by through fire, yes, mide achrina, by any other means, lo. It's not the case. Hatam, nami kativa, sreifa levasof. And there also it's written at the end. Dichtiv, why, as we go over, al shefa chadeshen yisaref. Okay, rest of the pasuk telling us that they're put into the place of burning, amre, and therefore we say, hahu yisaref mibaye le'likadetanya, that this kind of burning, okay, is necessary as we teach as follows. Yisaref, it will be burnt. Afal pi she'ein sham deshen, even though it's not the, so to speak, the place, the ash. Okay? Yisaref, it will be burnt. Afal pi shehitzita haor berubo, even though we say here that it's consumed, okay, totally, okay? Ravina Amar. Now Rabina is going to raise a different example, okay? Karuch v'tani michvat esh. If you, so to speak, roll it over, bend it over, okay? And it teaches michvat esh in regard to the example we had previously of a leprous spot on a burn or scar from a burn. Ein li ela shenichva ba'esh. We only have, he says, I only have learned it in regards to something where the burn occurred, okay, with fire, ubegachelet, or with coal, okay, nichva beramatz, or hot ash, besid roteach, with burning lime, ubigefasim roteach, or with burning plaster, ubechol davar, or other things. Hacha mechamat haor. Okay, and here, I'm sorry, ubechol davar haba mechamat haor, or any other kind of thing
that comes from fire,
that is derived from some sort of light, fire, right? La'atuye chame haor. And this comes to include then hot water. Minai, and how do I know this? Talmud Lomar, again, the text tells us and teaches, michva riba, that the fact of the double lashon of the word michva includes these other things. Now, have a further discussion on this. Rava raises a contradiction with the following. Still, in a sense, the original or the earlier question. Mi amar Rabbi Gechalim ikru eish. Are we saying that Rebbe really implied that coals are considered fire? But he's going to take it in a little different direction now. Or minhu, okay? Or we'll raise a contradiction based on the following. Gachalim, when we're talking about coals, Yechol al mamot, Maybe we're talking only smoldering coals. Talmud lomar esh. But the Torah text says fire. Esh, if we're dealing with fire, Yachol shall have it. Maybe we actually need a large flame, like a torch's flame. Talmud lomar gichale. The Torah text says, however, that it's coals, right? Okay. Ha ketzad. What do we mean by this then? Mevi min halochashot. That one must mean that he was referring to coals that were still flickering. Okay. Alma, in parenthesis, gichalim lo ikre esh amre. Maybe therefore we would not say that these coals are considered fire. Vahagufa kasha. But this statement in and itself is problematic. Amart, on the one hand, you're going to say gechale coals, yachol amoma omamot. I might have thought one was referring to smoldering. Alma lo chashot esh ninhu. Therefore, it would seem that flickering coals are considered like fire. Ema seifa. But I would say, look at the end of the statement. Esh Yachol shall have it. If by fire, I might have thought to include a real existing flame. Talmud lomar gechale. The Torah text said coals. Alma afilu lo chashot lav esh ninhu. That would seem to imply, therefore, that even flickering coals might not really be considered fire. Va'amar Rav Sheshet. So Rav Sheshet responds, Hachi katani. This is what it's teaching. Gachale yachol bein umamot bein lechoshot. Okay, when it says coals, I might have thought it could be either smoldering coals or flickering coals. Talmud Loma, therefore the Torah text is teaching us Aish, that there has to be some flame still coming possibly from it. Aish, Yachol shall have it. If I thought I needed a large flame, that's why the Torah teaches Gachale, coals. HaKetzad, how then do we understand this? Mevi min halochashot, that one can bring from the flickering coals. Mikol makom, nevertheless, gichalim lo ikre esh. It would seem that coals should not be called or considered fire. Kasha the Rebbe. That is a problem in regards to what Rebbe said. Now, Amar Abaye, Abaye tries to explain it. Taritz Hachi, explain it this way, he says. Gachale, when we're talking about the coals, Yechol Omamot Velo Lochashot. Maybe we're talking about smoldering coals and not flickering. Talmud Lomar, therefore the Torah teaches Aish, fire. Aish, and if it's fire, Yechol Ratzah shall have it, and one wants a large flame, Yavi, you can bring it. Ratzah Gachelet, Yavi, if he wants simply coals, he can bring. Talmud Lomar, Gachale, and that's why the Torah teaches coals. Gemara then asks, Ha Ketzad, how is that possible again? Mevim and halochashot, that one could bring flickering coals. Now, Rava disagrees, and Rava says as follows. Ratza gachelet yavi. If one wants a coal, he can bring it. Ratza shall have it yavi. He wants a flame, he can bring it. Shall have it below gachelet, hechi mishkachet la. But a flame without a source, without a coal, how are you going to find that? How is that possible? He gives the answer. Kegon shefia lemana mishcha. Okay, as in a situation where he has spread some sort of liquid oil on a utensil. Va'atle beinora. And then he comes and he lights that up. Okay. Hahu lamali kra lamaute. If that's the case, Gemara asks, why then do we have a verse that might be limiting? Hashta lifnei melech basar vadam eino sinke. Here, we would say if you don't use that kind of a source of fire before a king, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu lo shekeh, before the Holy One, blessed be He. In other words, on the Mizbeach. Okay, would you use that method of creating a fire? Absolutely not. So we're comparing it to how the fire was established on the Mizbeach. Remember, we had the ma'arechet there, a setup of wood, and that helped serve as the basis for the fire. Ela Amar Rava, but Rava says, excuse me, Taritz Hachi, explain it this way. Gachle, when we're talking about the coals, Yechol Omamot, it could be smoldering coals, Velo Lochashot, and not flickering. Talmud Lomar, that's why the Torah teaches Eish, fire. Eish, if fire, Yechol Yavi Mechza Gachelet Umechza Shalhelet. It's possible then to bring it partly from coal and partly flaming. Okay, Ada'il Legovai. Okay, as was brought inside, and the implication is brought inside to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, Have Kule Gachelet. Wasn't that entirely coals? Talmud Loma, as the text comes to teach us, Ve'lakach melo mahamachta gachalei esh me'al hamizbeach. Why? Because they took I'll call the use fry pan, okay? They took a pan that was full of coals of fire from off the altar. Excuse me. Misha'at lakicha, at the time that they took it, nahave gechalim, it was in a status of coals. Ibayalahu. So therefore ask, omamot or amamot. Do we say the word for smoldering, is it to be spelled with an aleph or with an ayin? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, says Rabbi Yitzchak, I cite a pasuk, Arazim lo aumamuhu began Elohim. Okay, citing this pasuk, he basically says that the word actually is with an ayin, right? And therefore, that's how we spell it. Okay. Excuse me. All right, we're going to get now to a new Mishnah. What's the connection between this new Mishnah and what we just finished studying? Remember, we got talking about the situation where you were going to roast the Korban Pesach inside it would appear an oven, whether the oven was cleaned out, not cleaned out, okay? Now, we also have already learned that there was a concern about using the spit made of metal, because would that imply that since the spit gets hot, okay, and the entire spit would be hot of metal, that might cook the insides of the animal, of the korban, rather than it being roasted by fire from the outside. Okay?
One question. When it's talking about the oven, the hot oven, are they saying the heat is roasting it?
Yeah. That the person, right, somebody is roasting it for their chabura, for their group.
Right. In a hot oven without anything in it.
Well, we don't know.
That has been gone off me already.
Right? We don't, well, not necessarily. In other words, maybe they roasted it. Remember, some of their ovens had, let's say, were open, were not closed.
Right.
They were open at the top, right?
Right.
So let's assume, I'm going to give a quick example so we can clarify. Let's assume that on the bottom of the oven, you had a place to put the wood.
Right.
Okay, which would be burnt. Then let's assume you had what I'll call a grill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
A
grating. That's a good phrase.
Great.
Okay? Then now when you baked bread, you didn't necessarily bake the bread always on the grating. Sometimes you took the dough and you stuck it against the inside of the oven.
Correct.
Bake it, and not on the grating. So here too, okay, it would seem that if the grating was just grates, okay, that maybe that would be sufficient based on the story, okay, that we saw, and the Gemara we just learned, to put the Korban Pesach on that grating. It would be directly heated from the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily on a spit, but the idea was apparently maybe they did have some sort of spit that they could put through the walls of the oven, okay, a hole in it, and slide it through. But this Mishnah is going to say what happens, okay, that's why I gave that example with the bread too.
Right.
If the earthenware sides of the oven is hot enough to bake bread, okay, that would seem to say that the entire oven gives off enough heat to do some sort of, let's call it in parenthesis, cooking, okay? What happens then if part of the Korban Pesach comes in contact with the side, a part of the oven? Are we going to say that that's not tzliach?
Right.
Okay. All right. So if that's the case, we now then can look at this next Mishnah. Okay. Matnitin, says our Mishnah, naga b'charso shel tanur. Let's say that part of the Korban Pesach came in contact, right, with the earthenware surface of the oven. What do? Yiklof et mekomo. Klipa. We have to cut off a section of the meat. Furthermore, says this Mishnah, nataf mirotvo. Okay, if some of the gravy, all right, from the animal bounced off the oven wall, right? Taf rutvo mirotvo al hacheres v'chazar elav, and then that gravy sort of bounced back onto the part of the animal. Yitol et mekomo. Okay, one has to just remove a slice, natila. Okay. Nitaf mirodvo al hasolet. Let's say that a situation occurs where some gravy, okay, gets on flour, all right? Yikmotz et mikomo. One has to take a kometz, a handful, and remove that flour. Let's take another example. Sachu b'shemen truma. If one basted, I'm going to use the term, okay, with oil that was truma oil, only supposed to be for kohanim, right? Im chavurat kohanim. If the group registered to eat it are all kohanim, yochelu, they can eat it. Im shel Yisrael. If the registered group are Israelites, im chayhu, if the meat is still raw, yedichenu, they have to wash off the truma oil, truma basting. Yedichenu, one washes it off. V'im tzlihu, if it's already been roasted, yiklof et hachitzon, one has to cut off again the outer layer of the meat. Another example, sachu b'shemen shel ma'aser sheni. This time they basted, so to speak, the animal's offering with oil, okay, that is considered from produce of ma'aser sheni. Okay, remember that should have been sold and money used to buy food in Jerusalem. Lo ya'asenu damim al b'nei chavura. You can't, so to speak, charge the members of that group money for that use of that oil. She'ein podin ma'aser sheni b'Yerushalayim, because we only can redeem ma'aser sheni produce and items in Jerusalem. So Gemara now says, Itmar, about this, what was said, Cham lecham, if something is hot and it goes into hot, Divrei hakol asur. Everybody is in agreement that it is forbidden. Tzoneim letoch tzoneim, cold into cold, Divrei hakol mutar. Everyone agrees it is permissible. Cham letoch tzoneim, hot going into cold, v'tzoneim letoch cham, or cold going into hot. Rav Amar ila'agavar. Rav says the topmost item takes preference. Shmuel Amar tata gavar. And Shmuel says what is at the bottom takes precedent. And we're going to stop here knowing that the law, halacha, is like Shmuel, tata gavar. That whatever is on the bottom, that's what takes precedence. Okay? And tomorrow
So in other words, if hot drips into cold, it's the cold that dominates? If hot drips into cold, the
Right.
cold dominates. But if cold drips into hot, the hot dominates.
Correct. So
Okay.
when, for example, you make tea on Shabbos, okay, and if you use scents and you don't use kli sheni, okay, but you have your hot water put in first,
Right.
and then you add your scents,
Since
and that's tata gavar. That's the one of the best examples of where we see that what is on the bottom takes precedence, and that's the situation.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Makes sense. Makes sense.
makes sense.
it makes very good sense.
Okay,
If that's what you
everybody,
you.
take care and stay well, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay warm too.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Take-
Rabbi,
Yeah.
quick question. Do you know if